Okay, hopefully people start joining pretty quick here, I think. Oh, yeah, I see the counter going up. That's good. Just give everyone another couple of minutes maybe to join and then get started.
Dave, do you think we should do a test of the Q&A before we start?
Nope, I see somebody just put in a test question, so that looks like it's working.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I guess we could probably get started then. Jamie, would you like to kick it off?
Sorry, let me take it away here. Good evening. I would like to welcome you to the HDC's information session on the proposed zoning amendments to the Holyrood Gardens site. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. My name is Jamie, and I'm the chair of the Holyrood Development Committee, a committee of the Holyrood Community Link. Since 2017, our volunteer committee has devoted a great deal of time to consult with, inform, and to help educate the community on planning, development, and transportation issues that may affect it. We have also worked to provide input and recommendations on these issues from a neighborhood perspective to the HCL board, city administration, and city council. Tonight's event is being hosted by the HDC and was planned as an information session. This is not an official City of Edmonton event, and therefore feedback is not being collected from the city. We have two portions to tonight's event. First off, we're joined by Senior Planner Andrew McClellan and Transportation Engineer Kirk Kwan from the City of Edmonton, who have kindly agreed to join us to provide a brief overview and answer any questions you may have about the proposed changes and potential upgrades to 93rd Avenue. HDC will finish the event by giving a brief overview of our thoughts about the proposed changes, next steps, and answer any questions that you might have. A few quick bits of housekeeping. We're keeping everyone's mics on mute in order to ensure the best quality sound for the presenter. We ask that you type your questions into the question and answer tab, which you should see on the bottom right side of your screen. And if you don't see it, if you just kind of hover over that area, it should bring it up. Questions will be viewed and read by our civics director and moderator, Dave. Please feel free to submit your questions at any point in time this evening. We'll do our very best to make sure that we answer all of them. If there's any questions that we're unable to get to or need more information to answer, we'll try and follow up after the session via email. If you would like a copy of the HDC slides this evening, we're happy to send those to you. Please just email us. While we completely understand the emotional aspects of this new rezoning, we will ask that you try to keep your questions as technically focused as possible. Given the proximity to the public hearing, administration is unable to defend their position until the hearing itself. Tonight, they're only available to answer our questions. Our committee is thankful to have had the opportunity to work with Mr. McClellan during the previous rezoning of Holyrood Gardens, as well as over the course of the current rezoning. So without further ado, I will pass the mic over to him.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Can everybody hear me? We're good. So I just need to share my screen here. If that's all right. All right, I'm hoping you can now see my presentation. So yeah, thanks Jamie for inviting Kirk and I here today. As I saw some of the names pop up there, I was reminded of lots of time that we spent with each other a few years ago, and actually I had pretty fond memories of that time. So I know in some ways we probably hoped that we wouldn't be seeing each other again talking about this site. We do have that opportunity again. So um, as Jamie mentioned, I'm here to specifically talk about the 93rd Avenue improvements. And I know that there's a lot of strong opinions about this application overall, and I completely understand that. But because we are right ahead of the public meeting, public hearing, it is important that we maintain that conversation for the public hearing venue. But because the 93rd Avenue improvements kind of came into this application a bit later on, Kirk and I are happy to sort of explain where that came from and how it will work. And so that's what I will do for you today. So just to quickly go over the application, I'm assuming people are quite familiar with the location, but here it is, the Holyrood Gardens redevelopment site, which is essentially on the east side of 85th Street, north and south of 93rd Avenue. So while there's several pieces of the revisions, and I'm not going to get into all of them, the council report and all the associated documents have all the details about the other components. The main driving force behind this was the applicant's desire to increase the number of dwellings that they would be allowed to develop on the site. And that's also sort of the main change that led to these improvements to the 93rd Avenue corridor. So right now, the zoning allows for 1,200 dwellings over these two redevelopment areas, area 2A and 2B. The developer already has a development permit for 760 dwellings south of 93rd Avenue. And because of the current number to 1,200 total, that would by default mean that they could seek 444 dwellings on the north side of 93rd Avenue. And as you can see on the lower image there, they're looking to increase the total to 1,650, which would allow them to do 890 north of 93rd Avenue. So something else that is factoring into these 93rd Avenue improvements were two subsequent motions that came out of the 2018 public hearing. And so what these did was direct administration to look at options for controlling traffic near the site, specifically in the lane directly to the east of the site. And then to also look at improvements to enhance the public realm to improve safety, understanding that there was going to be some level of increase in vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic and bike traffic in this area. And so prior to receiving this latest application, we hadn't really done a lot with getting to addressing these motions, understanding that the development timeline for Holyrood Gardens is a pretty long one. And there wasn't a need for us to really get into this until a little bit later on when buildings were actually getting built and occupied and that kind of thing. But when this application came in, it essentially gave us an opportunity to address these motions with the latest rezoning application. So we took that opportunity. So if, and I'll explain a little bit more about this in the next slide, but if this rezoning is approved, then we would consider that these motions have been satisfied and addressed with some of the regulations in the DC2 provision. If the application is refused, then we'll just in the same place we were before, where we have to address these motions still on our own, and we'll go back to doing that. So when we reviewed this latest application, in terms of the increase in number of dwellings, and also because we got a much better model to use in our transportation analysis, we were left with some concerns about what the impacts would be with the increase in density for this 93rd Avenue corridor between 85th Street and 83rd Street. And so we weren't really comfortable with that. And so this led to the idea of requiring the developer to build some improvements along this corridor after carrying out analysis of traffic and such. And so the concept you see here, which is also attached to the proposed zone, is essentially a very high level concept of what the developer would be obligated to build. And this kind of shows various options. There's no decisions that have been completely made over exactly what features there might be that might actually be implemented. But some of the things you see here include, we're calling it an expanded active nodes route from the LRT stop into the neighborhood. Essentially, it's just a wider shared use path. And you can also see some curb extensions around the lane there to try and narrow it to make the crossing for pedestrians shorter. Then a bike lane continuing over to 83rd Street, and then a potential roundabout at 83rd Street and 93rd Avenue. So these are just some of the options that would be available. And the concept here shows kind of all of them. In terms of how this would play out, and this is where it gets pretty complicated, so feel free to ask questions about this. If I don't remind myself about how this works, probably on a weekly basis, there's parts of it that I will end up not saying correctly because it's really complicated. So essentially what happens is right now, like I mentioned, they have a development permit that's already approved for 760 dwellings south of 93rd Avenue. So if this rezoning is approved and they seek another development permit that either gets them to 1,000 dwellings being applied for at the development permit stage, or the second building north of 93rd Ave, then they have to enter into agreement with the city to construct these improvements. And then at some point after that, and there'll be a bit of a time here because once they enter into the agreement, they'll be able to get their development permit to start work on the development north of 93rd Avenue. And then after LRT has been in operation for at least 1 year, then they have to undertake some more traffic analysis that's, of what's happening. And so we've done a lot of modeling, but nothing can replace, going and collecting actual data with the LRT in operation to figure out what's actually happening with traffic and the intersections and everything. And so this would basically serve two purposes. So this would obviously inform what decisions get made about what improvements happen to 93rd Avenue, but it would also satisfy that first motion to go and look into improvements or changes to the lane and the corridor. So that's where that one comes into play. So after the study is complete, there would be some engagement with the community to go over the findings of that, and also to start hearing from you about what priorities you have. So I mentioned things, in that concept about bike lanes, the roundabout. But we want your input. If nobody wants a roundabout, then we can look at other options. There have been similar scenarios where roundabouts have been implemented, and I think pretty successfully. But we can have that discussion. If you think that there's something else that would be better, then we'll have that conversation with you. Ultimately, it'll be up to the city to decide and be satisfied with what improvements are actually going to address the requirements based on the traffic study done, the modeling, and then, like I said, we'll factor in the community's priorities as well. And once we decide on what those are going to be, then it's going to be up to the developer to actually construct and pay for those improvements to get built. Now, the timing of construction happens when either they get to 800 dwellings that are actually built and occupied, then a clock starts for 2 years after that point, or again, either the second building adjacent to 93rd Avenue is actually built and occupied. And so there's a difference between the number of 1,000 dwellings, which is just getting a development permit, and the 800 that we're talking about here, which is actually built buildings with 800 units. And the idea is that at the end of that 2 years, when they will have the improvements constructed, that should coincide with when they actually have a number of units built and occupiable that's somewhere in that 1,200 to 1,600 range which is when we've identified the need for these improvements to be in place because of the volumes that would come into the area when you get into those higher amounts of dwellings. It's also possible that this timing could coincide with neighborhood renewal in Holyrood, which is really tentatively could happen sometime in the late 2020s or early 2030s. Obviously, that's a little bit too far down the road to know for sure, but if you think about the Holyrood Gardens and when they might get to 800 units occupied or 1,200 units occupied, it could be in that same 7, 10, 12-year range. And so you might find that while the developer is still paying for this section, the city might also be doing the neighborhood renewal throughout the neighborhood and potentially connecting to it and with new bike infrastructure or whatever else gets decided through that neighborhood renewal process. So that's the summary of how and why this 93rd Avenue corridor improvements came into the DC2. And again, it would be the responsibility of the developer to pay and construct for these according to the timelines. And there'd be many agreements, obviously, with the city that would have to be executed as well. So I think that's it. We're happy to answer any questions. If it's more on the technical side, then Kirk is here. He's the one that has really read and understood the actual transportation analysis so far and can answer some of those technical questions. And then just once again, just a reminder that we do have to stay focused on this part of the application, and we aren't able to get into sort of the broader reasons why the city is supporting this or anything like that. But please come to the public hearing and share those views and take part in that way. So that's all for me. Pass it over to Jamie or Dave to handle the questions.
Yep, so we've got a couple of questions. One of them is, has there been proper data collected on 93rd Avenue traffic before anything's been built there? So they're saying there's already been a substantial increase in traffic due to the lack of right turning at the former traffic circle intersection.
So I think that's probably best for Kirk to provide an answer for.
Hey, everyone. Don't think new traffic data has been collected with this rezoning application, especially along 93rd Avenue. The impacts are difficult kind of to count right now because of kind of the pandemic effects as well as the ongoing construction in the neighborhood. So you don't get really good data on what this might look like in terms of operational traffic volumes. I would say that the last TIA that was done, the transportation analysis, the previous rezoning, that did include traffic counts from, I think that was 2017.
Okay, thanks. Another question we have is more related to the building. So it is, rather than reducing the green space north of 93rd Avenue, couldn't these 4 floors be added on top of the other nearby buildings, raising them to 6 floors along 93rd Avenue?
So unfortunately, I think that's probably a question that we can't really get into with this discussion. There's obviously lots of different opinions about what could have happened here in terms of the buildings staying the same or changing, but we had the application we had, and you know, we've concluded in our report what we did, and if people have other ideas about that, then I think I have to request that you share that at the public hearing, and council can consider it.
Can I ask a couple questions with regards to the upgrades along 93rd Avenue? My first question, sorry, I'm like, so you don't have to take your mic off. So my first question is actually with regards to, I'm sorry, I don't know, Andrew, can you bring up the slide by chance again where it shows what you said you have to remind yourself all the time, the complexity of the implementation process? Beautiful, thank you so much. So where it talks about the study for multimodal traffic circulation study, and I noticed that it says for 93rd Avenue. So my clarification would be, is that like when this would be implemented and they would be collecting data, would that namely be the only place that the data is being collected, or is 95th Avenue still going to be taken into consideration? My thought is just, if suddenly traffic started shortcutting down the alley and going out onto 95th instead of the train, would we miss that in this study, or would it still catch it?
Kirk?
So yeah, this multimodal traffic circulation study is mainly focused around 93rd Avenue and the alley. I think that was to address mainly the motions, as well as to inform the future improvements. Surrounding neighborhood traffic volumes, like along 85th Street, 95th Avenue, 91st Avenue, all around the neighborhood, that's kind of assessed through the city's regular traffic operations processes, and that is getting kind of a wider general look as the LRT comes online, just all along the length of the LRT actually. So yeah, that is something that gets looked at by the city, not necessarily just by this developer.
So sorry, just to clarify, does that mean it would be more of something that would happen with neighborhood renewal versus this project?
It would get a look at neighborhood renewal, like traffic volumes and stuff, but just in general, like as the LRT comes online, we know that there's going to be traffic pattern changes, and we've done our best kind of to look at it with the new model. We have the new 2050 model within the traffic analysis that we've done. But yeah, that it's not tied directly to this development. We would be looking at the traffic pattern changes even if this development wasn't kind of coming online, just as a result of LRT.
Thank you.
I have a question, if I may. Andrew, could you go to your previous slide, the one, the diagram? And I guess question for Kirk, can you explain everything that's going on in the transition area there too, just for people who aren't quite as familiar? Because we've got the two parkade entrances, the road, the alleyway, and so on, and just kind of run by how your thinking goes on what's happening there.
Yeah, so we kind of put this big oval around the area because we don't have all the details, unfortunately, at this time, because we don't know like exact locations for the curb, exact locations for the access, exact location for the trees. It's a complicated area, so we know this needs a closer look. So we've kind of highlighted it here. Like you were mentioning, there's the two parkade accesses. There's the turning lane, which I think actually starts a little bit further to the west. There's the potential crossing with curb extensions. There's interactions with kind of where the bike lane transitions from being on road to behind the boulevard. So that's all kind of really complicated to get into design details at the rezoning stage. So we're just highlighting that as a transition area so it gets a closer look at more detailed stages of design. And this would all kind of be informed by that multimodal study. So if we see there's a lot of people walking or cycling down here, we would make sure that we design those things appropriately.
Thank you.
We've got a couple more questions come in. One of them is, I am most concerned with the alley behind Holyrood Gardens between 93rd and 95th, as I live right nearby, and my rear garage is on that alley. I have information on the development, but not on the plans for the alley. At some point this evening, is that something you can talk about, I guess?
So in terms of this development, the alley doesn't actually have a vehicle access along it for the development. So we're not requiring too many improvements there. I think the part along the north side of the lane accessing 95th Avenue has to get repaved. But south of that, not too much is happening because there's not actually too much traffic expected to use the lane. As you say, there might be shortcutting concerns, like people might be using the alley. Generally, the TIA, the traffic analysis, it assumes people would rather use 83rd Street kind of to access 95th Avenue or 79th Street to the south, or 91st Avenue to the south, sorry. So that's kind of what the traffic analysis assumes right now, but with that future multimodal traffic survey, we would get additional data on how much that alley does get used, whether other improvements are required, like maybe a circulation change where we change those to southbound or northbound only.
And I'll just expand. I just pulled up the actual DC2 wording. So the DC2 does require the developer to upgrade the lane behind area 1 to a standard 6 meter paved width where possible, and to with the potential to encroach on the site in constrained areas. So that's really the portion of the lane that's behind the already built development on the far north. And I'll also mention that there's just a standard requirement all the time for the developer to fix any damage caused to lanes, to sidewalks, to curbs as a result of construction. So the city will take a look after construction to see what may or may not have been done and require fixing of those of that damage as well.
Sorry, can I just make a clarification, Kirk? Did you say that there was no access for the development from the laneway?
So, yeah, no like parkade access is what I meant. There is
No
visitor
parkade
parking.
access. Okay, because there is some surface parking back there, as well as loading zones, moving zones, and garbage collection, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think some people know the long history of this, but essentially it was a matter of making sure that the parkade access which is where obviously the majority of the traffic would be, is from 93rd Avenue and not the lane. If the developer had wanted to put them to the lane, then we would have had much higher requirements for improving that lane, potentially burying the utility poles and utilities. And that was, as the developer said, very cost prohibitive, which is where having those being on 93rd Avenue primarily came from.
Awesome. Thanks for that background info, gentlemen, and clarification. Appreciate it.
Okay, and sorry, just to clarify something Kirk said, which speaks to another question that was asked. So there's potential that the laneway could be turned into a one-way. Is that what I heard?
There is potential. I would say that the current traffic analysis, it doesn't look like the traffic volumes would be that high to necessitate changing that to a one-way lane. But yeah, that recommendation would be made from that multimodal traffic survey, where after the LRT's been not in operations for at least a year, we would get a better idea of circulation around the site. And if we do see that the alley is seeing like crazy high traffic volumes, we would make that recommendation at that time.
Okay, thank you. I think we're just about 7:30, a little past, but do you have time for just one more question that came in? Okay, it is, when will we know about the potential roundabout? That sounds nice.
Oh, I can answer that. Kirk's a roundabout fan. I think he was the one that that sort of suggested this. But yeah, I mean, basically, we wouldn't know exactly what's going to happen until that multimodal study has been done, and you know, things like the volumes expected at that intersection are more known. And then obviously that was one of the big ones that we would definitely want to talk to the community about, and particularly the residents that are right at that intersection. There's not a lot of differences, I don't think, that they would experience, but that's definitely one of those ones that we want to have a conversation with you about, when the time comes to see if that's something that's wanted or not. Anything to add on that, Kirk?
No, it's good to see there's support for a roundabout this. Yeah, that was my idea. And I think it would be a great kind of entrance to the neighborhood if it was implemented.
Great, thank you guys. That's all the questions that have come in.
I'm just going to take one more moment to thank both Andrew and Kirk for all their work so far. And thank you again so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you carving time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. And we'll let you get back to the rest of your evenings. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. I hope this was helpful, and I hope that we'll see some or all of you at the public hearing next week.
And sorry, just before you sign off, if anybody has any questions that they think about after this engagement, I said I'm one of those people where if it's not in the brain, it's in the feet. So as soon as you get up and walk away, or as soon as you watch these guys leave the meeting, you think of your question, just send them to us and we'll forward them along to the right department and try and make sure that we can get you your answers.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I guess that means I'm up next. So let me make sure I've got my ducks in a row here. Okay, yeah, so I already introduced myself, but just for those who may have joined a bit late, I'm Dave Sutherland. I'm the Civics Director for Holyrood Community League, and of course, a member of the Holyrood Development Committee. So I'm going to start us off by talking a bit about some of the building design changes that are being proposed, since that wasn't part of Andrew's presentation. And I'll talk a bit about our committee's perspectives on them. So for a bit of historical context, yes, the Holyrood Garden site was rezoned pretty recently. It was a fairly contentious process. I'm not sure how many of you remember it, but yeah, it went back and forth a number of times. And we ended up having some very extensive community involvement with a lot of different stakeholders, doing our best to try and make improvements and get some more benefits for the community, since it was just going to be such a disruptive development for the community. But despite the months of work that we all put into it, Regency had come back with proposals that missed the mark completely, not once but twice. And despite a lack of support from the community, from the stakeholders, and from even the Edmonton Design Committee, it pushed ahead to public hearing in July of 2018. Our committee actually sensed that council was leaning towards approving the rezoning. So what we managed to do was try and get some last minute amendments put together to get some of those compromises for the community. And council supported a number of them, but they also rejected a handful of others. And they approved the rezoning. So what's being proposed to change with the buildings now? Go over it one by one. So first, the transition building that's on 93rd Avenue is proposed to increase from about 2 to 4 stories. So that kind of reduces that little transition area between single family homes right behind it, and basically builds more of a wall along 93rd Avenue here. Second, this mid-rise building in the middle on 85th Street is proposed to increase from 4 to 6 stories on that particular facade. And then also adding an additional 4-story wing, which extends onto what was previously designated as publicly accessible space. Now, just to be clear, the previous rezoning, there was a minimum of this publicly accessible space that Regency must provide. That number has not changed, and the amount they're providing still meets that minimum. It's just there's overall a decrease. And fourth, the floor plates, or basically the widths of the two towers that bookend the development, is being proposed to increase from 750 to 800 square meters. Now that actually exceeds some of the city's own guidelines about tower design, where 750 is kind of basically the what's considered the upper limit these days. So I think you've already kind of know the answer to this, but does our committee support the proposed changes? In a word, no. So why are we against these changes? There's a number of reasons we'll get into, but the first is the design that's already approved is already fundamentally flawed. And that's not just an opinion of ours. That this quote on the slide is directly from the Edmonton Design Committee's response to the proposal from a few years back. And for those not familiar, the Edmonton Design Committee is the city's own panel of experts in art, architecture, planning, and landscape design. And they were asked to look at this as part of some of those compromises. Yeah, and I guess the proposed changes now really only serve to amplify and deepen those flaws. And again, that's not just our opinion. This is actually a quote from administration's report to council for this rezoning proposal. The changes create more walls with less, height variation to break it up. They create more repetition, and of course, they also reduce the amount of open space that's available and create additional shadowing over the area. This basically represents walking back a lot of the design changes that we did manage to get out of Regency during the last rezoning. Just to go over some of the other things that are being proposed to change and why we're not talking about them as much. Our committee actually looked into open option parking rather extensively. And while it is a fair bit of a departure from how we've often thought about parking in our city, we actually do support this change. It does help to further cement this project as a transit-oriented development, and will help reduce the amount of traffic in the area by limiting how many vehicles can be parked in the parkade, basically. We also support the proposed traffic calming measures in 93rd Avenue. Of course, we asked for those during the last rezoning, but the commitment we got to it was not the most, but now it looks like they're taking it a little more seriously, which is good to see. And lastly, there is a change to the permitted uses where minor alcohol sales is being changed to liquor stores. We looked into that as well. That it's really just a wording change to bring it in line with some updates to the zoning bylaw. It doesn't actually approve the permitted uses that have already been approved, and that's not going to change either. I'm going to hand this off now to another HDC member, Mike Barron, who is going to talk briefly about some additional transportation items. Over to you, Mike.
Sorry about that. I think we're rolling now. Can you hear me all right? Okay, so my name is Mike Barron, and I've taken a close look at the projected impacts on transportation from this development in combination with everything else that's expected to happen in terms of development in the neighborhood over the next 30 years or so. we have a new model now. So 3 years ago, when the current zoning was approved, it was all based on a traffic impact assessment study of the day. A new study has been redone, and it factors in things like Bonnie Doon Mall, the growth of straddling apartments, and a general increase in background traffic throughout, really throughout the city, but also throughout our more local sort of streets. One of the more interesting things to come out of that is when you look at the difference between what the modeling says now and what it said then, is it actually figures we'll see less traffic in the immediate vicinity of the development. It's a little bit of a head scratcher because there are supposed to be 450 additional units, and presumably some of them will come by car. But with open option parking, we're not exactly sure just what those numbers are actually going to look like. But in any case, the question to keep in mind is, where does that traffic actually go? So one of the more obvious places could be going is the arterials that surround the neighborhood. When you look at the old modeling and the newer modeling, we do see a general worsening of peak hour congestion to the point where about 75% of the intersections studied are basically rated a fail when we look at the 2050 year horizon. That's not perhaps particularly surprising. Many intersections will be failing throughout the city at that point based on current growth projections. But it does now look worse than we thought it might just a few short years ago. But there's another place that traffic could be going, and that is here onto the residential streets within the neighborhood of Holyrood. And this is probably the deepest concern that I personally have about this development. From the very beginning of the process, starting in 2017, the community has always been very clear that there's major concerns surrounding shortcutting and pedestrian safety and increased traffic level within our streets. And what we're seeing now is modeling that projects a problem quite a bit worse than it was assessed to be just a few years ago, particularly at the north end of the development. Also on 93, and also at the south end of the development on 91st. So those are the three main areas where shortcutting basically enters our neighborhood, and they all show dramatic increases when we look at the total traffic volumes projected for the year 2050. That might be okay, except that it does cause problems relating to design thresholds. So two-lane collector streets like 79th Street and 95th Avenue, the main kind of crossroads of our community, are generally meant to stay within 5,000 vehicles per day. To be true, they can be made to accommodate up to 10,000 per day and still meet standard, but above 5,000 mitigation is required. And the streets tend to take on a very different character. So whereas the current zoning and projections have us well under those thresholds in most cases, we do see dramatic increases that actually put us over that threshold, not just in one location, but really throughout the study area. From a policy standpoint, the city is increasingly making it more official that they do value safe systems, pedestrian-based, active modes of transportation, and healthy communities, not motor vehicle-based communities. So it's unfortunate that we're looking at a proposal that would inject rather a lot of motor vehicle traffic into the community with no real commercial upside to it. There's lots of policy also throughout the city plan on exactly what the active transportation network should look like, but it does aim to reduce traffic congestion, and that's, to my mind, hard to reconcile with the numbers projected to go up the way they are. The data is also even less compatible with bicycle infrastructure, where the traffic thresholds are much lower. So roads with bike boulevards up to 40 kilometers shouldn't really have more than about 1,500 vehicles per day, and we're exceeding that by some pretty wide margins with this proposal. So that is definitely a concern and a challenge. And that's about all I had to say on that topic, but I would like to take any questions you may have about the transportation aspect of things.
There is a question that has come in. It's in regards to open option parking, and they're wondering if it may result in an increase in non-residents parking on 83rd Street, and is that a concern? Who would like to take that?
Jamie, did you want to field that?
Sure, I was going to say I can take that one away totally. So open option parking, I'm like, it's super challenging. Like there's a lot of data that shows that open option parking works. However, we've never seen it in Edmonton. So obviously things change slightly when you put them in different contexts. So there's a lot of like really positive stuff that says that that shouldn't be a concern. Again, it's one of those things that with newer policy, like you never really know 100%. So we can't offer any guarantees because we've never seen open option parking in Edmonton. However, I think it's really not appealing for people to, like, just as an example, like the one that we talk about all the time is anybody that lived at the development. I think this one, I'm going to see if I can bring up the question again, but it's more geared towards people, non-residents, sorry. And I'm like, there's the thing with open option parking is I'm like, me trying to answer this question is about as easy as Andrew answering the timeline process for all those potential mitigation measures. Like there's just so much up in the air. Like in all honesty, if the developer came back with as many units as he's asking for and put in open option parking and maxed out his parking to the max numbers, he'd have numbers way higher than our committee ever wanted to see here. So I can't like give you a guaranteed, honestly, I think the reality is, given the type of development that the developer will be building, residents, I would be surprised if there wasn't parking for the commercial and parking for the residents included as well. As a matter of fact, as we were kind of reviewing this super new policy, we found, and sorry, this is really challenging to explain, but there's no, there's still a maximum number of parking spaces, even with the open option parking. How do I explain this properly? I'm sorry. I have a hard time wrapping my head around this. I had to go back and forth a number of times with planning. We felt that that was still higher than in our previous DC2. So that meant even with this policy that's supposed to actually encourage less vehicle traffic, there was still a door that was left open because this policy is so new. So that was one of the areas that Planner Andrew McClellan actually helped work with the committee. He was able to incorporate a clause into the DC2 to keep maximum numbers, to be able to limit maximums. I don't know if I answered your question at all. Dave, is there anything that you could maybe add that might be more helpful?
Yeah, I think this is something that is gonna be kind of a trial and error thing. So I think one of the options that we were looking into was having a residential parking plan for the neighborhood around the LRT stop. So that would be like similar to the permit program you see in like Garneau or around Stadium Station. I'm not even sure actually if the city is still going to go that direction, because they're doing a lot of reviews and a lot of new bylaw proposals around parking. So there may even be some options, say, they might even put in some paid parking around that area. And if that's the case, we'll have to see how they manage that, and to make sure any of those revenues go back into the community and things like that. So there's still lots of work happening in this area, but yeah, I definitely understand the concern about residential parking, and it's always going to be a contentious one as well.
And sorry, just under the current parking program, I will add to that, Dave, is that those towers wouldn't be included in that permit program. So that would mean it would be for the residents, like the actual single family dwellings. And I do believe there's a little bit for like lower, is it under 3 stories? So a smaller apartment, but not a larger scale apartment like that.
Yeah, I believe it's under 3 stories. You're right.
Again, there's so much, given that the city's trying to put in this new open option parking policy, there is so much that they're going to have to keep following and evaluating. Like, this is coming back to urban planning committee. Street parking actually is coming back to urban planning committee. Would be, I want to say it's somewhere around the beginning of May or end of May, beginning of June, something like that. So they're constantly reviewing this and following along to try and make sure that implementation is successful and that problems are being addressed with this new strategy.
Okay, in the interest of time, we're actually running a bit behind, but we can stay a bit more if everyone is good.
Don't forget me, Dave.
Yep, I have not forgotten about you.
Okay, good.
You're actually right next.
Right, I'm having trouble technology issues right now, so.
Yeah, yeah, there's still some, just to let everyone know, there's still some outstanding questions on the board. We will get to them at the end as well. So if you're still here after 8. And of course, just a reminder, we are recording this, and we'll make it available online shortly after as well. Now, without dragging this on further, Carolyn, please.
Okay, and I apologize. I had to go in and out, and now I can only see Dave on my screen, so I don't know what you can see, but hopefully you can see me. My name is Carolyn Skinner, and I'm here to talk about family-friendly housing, basically. So the purpose of well-designed transit-oriented development, or TOD, which Holyrood Gardens is supposed to be designed to be, is to help prevent urban sprawl, which in turn reduces the need for the construction of new city infrastructure, such as sidewalks, roadways, utilities, etc. And hopefully also at the same time reducing city taxes. And it does all this while reducing our carbon footprint, which is good for the environment. So who is purchasing the new homes in the suburbs that contribute so much to urban sprawl? Overwhelmingly, it's families who are looking for a safe place to raise their young children. As a result, a city that's truly serious about preventing urban sprawl should focus its efforts very closely on finding ways to entice those families to move instead into mature neighborhoods. One way cities are trying to achieve that is through well-designed transit-oriented development that includes a significant portion of well-designed family units, a goal that's actually expressed in a variety of City of Edmonton documents. Ideally, these units would be at ground level, each with their own private outdoor space. Unfortunately, in their new proposal, Regency Developments has neither increased the number of 2-bedroom units proportionally, nor have they followed the city administration's suggestion to add additional family units. Why is that a problem? In the plan that council approved in 2018, Regency Developments designated just 120 units with an average size of 2.25 bedrooms located somewhere in the first 4 stories of a building as family friendly. That number is just 10% of the already approved 1,200 units and only 7% of the proposed 1,650 units. And only 30 of these units, that is 2.5% of the current 1,200 units, or 1.9% of the proposed units will contain 3 bedrooms, the size desired by most families with 2 children. 24 of the family-friendly units previously approved by City Council are to be built between 90th and 93rd Avenue on the southern portion of Holyrood Gardens. But the largest percentage of the units, 96 of them, are to be built on the northern portion of the site between 93rd Avenue and Holyrood Boulevard apartments. If Council votes to support Regency Development's new proposal with a 102% increase in units on the north part of the site, that's not overall, made possible through the construction of an additional building and increased building heights and dimensions, this area will now be much more crowded, darker, and more shadowed, and with less green space. So yes, if you build it, they can come, but if you choose not to build well-designed family units, units contained within a well-designed, sustainable, transit-oriented development, many families can't or won't choose to come. Therefore, one of the reasons that we do not support Regency Development's new proposal is that it doesn't serve families with children, families that would add to the vibrancy and sustainability of our neighborhood. Instead, the new proposal only serves to detract from the quality of the environment that would contain the majority of the family units already approved in the 2018 plan. And if you have any questions, please send them in.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, I guess to summarize, yeah, we basically don't support a lot of the proposed changes. Major reasons being that it only further deepens the already flawed design and does nothing to improve it. It represents walking back of a lot of the compromises that we fought hard for in the last go around and many revisions. And third, it really does nothing to add more family-friendly housing to the community, not even proportionally to the increase in units, which I can't remember if that number was given or not, but it's going from a maximum of 1,200 to 1,650. Yeah, family-friendly housing is something our community really needs, and especially since the removal of the existing Holyrood Gardens townhouses is removing a lot of family-friendly housing that already existed. Okay, calls to action. What can you do? We're recommending writing letters to council before May 3rd. You can write it up as an email to city.clerk@edmonton.ca. We want to reference the May 4th, 2021 public hearing. It is agenda item 3.25, Charter Bylaw 19681. And all of this information is, of course, available at edmonton.ca/meetings, as well as other contact methods. Like, it may not feel like doing a lot, but all of the letters are attached to the file. Councillors do see them, and they are part of their decision-making process. What about speaking at the public hearing? It's still an option. We are recommending letters instead, though, as lengthy public hearings may actually work against us. That said, if you do wish to speak, you can register at edmonton.ca/meetings. All we ask is that you try to keep your points short and focused, so that the hearing, hopefully can wrap up in one day and not carry over into another day. Okay, and now we can go back to answering questions if there are still some.
Sorry, Dave, may I just double check? Carlos said, thanks, Mike. Is the traffic analysis available? I tried to respond to you and send you a link. I'm not too sure if you can see that in the chat, but I'll just say it is on the City of Edmonton's website under the Holyrood zoning amendments. And you have to scroll to the very bottom of the page and it's listed as the final TIA.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate you following up on that one. I was going to do that, but I didn't want to open a new browser window and potentially have it throw off the whole presentation. There is also a question, what is the ultimate 50-year anticipated daily traffic count along 95th Ave and 79th Street? And does it provide, or does the city provide projections for 5-10 years out? Mike, is that something you'd be able to answer?
Muted here. There we go. Okay, so the best available for that is the modeling for the year of 2050. So we don't have anything that actually looks beyond that time frame. But looking at 95th Avenue, there's east of 85th Street, so right on the corner there, that would be projected to be 5,583 vehicles per day in the year 2050. Elsewhere on 95th Street, at the other end, west of 79th Street, so approaching the crossroads, 6,618. And then for 79th Street, we have 5,422 vehicles per day south of 95th, and 7,127 north of 90th Avenue. So those are basically the numbers, and yes, some of them do exceed the 5,000 vehicle per day design standard.
Thanks, Mike. We've got a couple of thank yous for you and for Carolyn as well, just to let you know. Does anyone have any further questions? Please put them in the Q&A box. Okay, looks like there might not be any more. So
Sorry,
if
can
you
I
do
just,
have any, oh, sorry, go
I was
ahead.
gonna
Jamie.
say, if it's okay, I'm sorry, I feel like I totally epically failed at answering the open option parking question. And I just saw another one here from Carrie that says, does open option parking mean that the developer can offer fewer spots than would be necessary to give each resident a spot? So just to give you guys like a brief little overview of open option parking, it's based on the fact that our city's done all these studies and determined that for years we were building this excessive amount of parking that actually wasn't getting used. And it's really costly to build parking. So this is supposed to provide the opportunity for people that are building any kind of development, whether it's a business or whether it would be a residence, to say, we know our clientele and we know what they want for parking. So in this area, this is going to work. And in this area, this is going to work. But it's designed to make things a little bit less rigid and provide more flexibility, which should theoretically be better for everybody. I mean, even when you think from the perspective of buying an apartment and you're never going to use the parking space there, like you're buying an apartment on a transit oriented development to take a train, you're not paying for a parking stall in your apartment that you're never going to use.
The quick answer is yes. They don't have to provide one stall per unit.
They could provide no stalls for their parking. So they wouldn't have to, there's no more like you must provide a stall or you must provide this many stalls or at least this many stalls. They could provide no stalls, as few as 0 stalls for the whole development.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that's, it's going to be up to, that's going to be up to what the market dictates. And, Edmonton does remain a fairly car oriented city. So it's not likely going to change too much, but it does allow a lot more flexibility than existed before. One follow-up question was, where do you park if you have no spot?
Answer is you're supposed to take transit because it's a transit oriented development. Which doesn't really answer your question, but it's transit oriented is supposed to cater to people who don't use cars.
Yeah. And if you go there and there's no parking, it's one of those things that either you go there and you take the train, right? So Great short answers, Mark. Thanks.
Okay, well, we're a bit over time. I think if you do have any other questions, feel free to send them to us. Our email address is hdc@holyroodcommunity.org. We'll do our best to answer or direct them. Yeah, I think the most or the best thing we could ask you to do at this point is please do write to City Council. Let them know your views on these proposed amendments. Yeah, and again, if you have any questions or guidance about that or about speaking in front of council, we can help you with that as well. And that's it for me. Does anyone else have any closing comments?
I would just like to say thank you so much, everyone who's joined us. Zenon would like to say bye-bye. And thank you for everyone, just all the time that you've devoted to informing yourselves and working to make Holyrood a better place. It's, we know firsthand, it requires a lot of effort. So thank you. We are stronger together. Forgive me, the last one I was just going to ask you, Dave, is somebody was wondering if they could have a recording of tonight's presentation. I'm assuming that we're going to put that up on either our Facebook page or our website, but I don't see that being an issue. Dave?
Yeah, I'll make sure it gets up online somewhere. It'll probably be on YouTube, and then we'll put links up on the HDC Facebook page and Holyrood community page as well.
And thank you so much to the Holyrood Development Committee for putting on such a great event. I am just forever blown away what an amazing community and what an amazing committee I work on, and that's what makes it all worthwhile. So thank you so much to the committee for making tonight's event possible and making everything happen. We're pretty good at flying by the seat of our pants.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a great evening. And we will do our best to keep you updated on what's happening.